candidates will get the same 4 questions, and all 4 candidates will get the same amount of time. So without further ado, for the sake of time, I want to make sure that we get kicked off on time with the first mayoral candidate, Alioto.
So I will be the moderator. Can you hear me? We're going to do in morning and time that is so. Ready to roll? Okay. Thank you so much.
Now, can everybody hear me, or is it better without the mic?
Without the mic.
Better
With the mic? Okay. First of all, so I have 10 minutes. I always have to remind myself, because I am so passionate about the issues that I'm running for mayor on, that I tend to go over the time limit, and then when he says time's up, I go, oh no, it can't be up already. As most of you know, I'm a born and raised San Franciscan. I've been 3 generations. My grandmother was born in North Beach in the late 1800s, and my father was born in North Beach. So I'm 3 generations San Franciscan, and I was, of course, born here. I have 4 children and 5 grandchildren. I have, for the last 18 years, I'm a civil rights trial lawyer, which means that I have defended in the courtrooms of America people who have been discriminated based on their religion, their disability, their race, national origin, age, sexual orientation, gender. I have represented many, many vets in my life as a trial lawyer, but as a supervisor and as president of the Board of Supervisors, I was the legislator for the vets during the, from 1989 to 1997. It's always been a great honor to me to represent the vets. And of course, during that time, we had the situation of the vets coming home from Iraq in 1991, going to Iraq, coming home from Iraq in 1991, and the situation of just having the new homeless population increase so rapidly. And so much of it had to do with the vets and how we took care of post-traumatic stress, how we took care of mental illness. So I was the chair of the health committee for 8 years. Even when I was president of the Board of Supervisors, I was the chair of the mental health committee. I created the mental health advisory board. You know, I tell my juries all the time when I'm in closing argument that there's a very, very fine line between good mental health and bad mental health. And you have to be there for the person to help them to make sure that that fine line doesn't get crossed. And we in public life have a great opportunity to help people when it comes to mental illness. We have never funded mental illness properly, never. In the 2000s, I did the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. I met with the Veterans Affairs Secretary, at the time was Principe. I say that in an Italian way. I'm sure you all say, how do you all say it?
Principe.
Principe. Principe means prince. And so I used to meet with him all the time in Washington, D.C. And for the 8 years, from 2004 to 2012, we received more federal funding from Veterans Affairs, from the Health Department, for mental health, Veterans Affairs. We even received homeless funding from the post office. The interagency that deals with homelessness has over 62 federal agencies. So in other words, homelessness isn't just about health. Homelessness isn't just about veterans and just about mental health and just about the things that we believe that it's just specifically about. It's about the post office. It's about transportation. It's about just about every different agency. So the interdepartmental agency that we worked with from 2004 to 2012 funded San Francisco more than in any time in the history of our city. So let me tell you a little bit about that plan, because I'm very proud of that plan. That plan worked. The 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness was a stellar, stellar success. And it ended in 2012. It ended when Gavin Newsom went to be lieutenant governor. and the new administration started, and then techs started coming to town in order to fill up the positions and the employment. So that's when it ended. But let me tell you, from 2004 to 2012, we housed 4,632 chronically homeless. That means people on the street from 4 to 6 years. Ladies and gentlemen, do you know how hard it is to house someone who lives on the street that long? They are embedded on the street. That is their way of life. It is very hard to convince them to come in out of the street. And at the time, a whopping 38% of the 4,600 chronically homeless were our vets. Our vets. I gave speech after speech when I was president of the board of supervisors and doing the years 2000 to 2012 of the shame that we don't take care of our vets, especially those that are homeless in the streets, don't even know what benefits they could receive. I've worked with literally hundreds of vets to get their proper benefits so that they know what they can receive. So let me go back to the chronic homeless for a second. So, out of 6,400 people, I'll get that one. The lack of recidivism, 94% of those people are still in the unit that we put them in. That is an amazing success story. So what happened was we had all of these buildings in the pipeline. We used 8 or 9 of them. Some of them had 300 units, some had 400 units. Really wonderful programs, master leases, and we moved the chronically homeless in. Or we moved them, if they couldn't get on their feet, then we would triage and have to go the mental illness hospitalization. And then into some kind of temporary permanent that led to permanent supportive housing. The key to a successful homeless plan, the key are the 3 words, permanent supportive housing. You can't put someone in a program for 6 months, have them get better, have them feel better about themselves, have them want to work, have them have some dignity, have them feel good about their time, whether it's in Iraq or Vietnam, have them feel like they're accomplished. You can't do that for 6 months and then put them back in the situation they came from. And that's what we were doing year after year after year. Permanent supportive housing, the chronic plan, would not do that. It put people right into units with a minute clinic on the bottom floor, which means there would be doctors downstairs. The perfect example of this is the YMCA on Golden Gate. The whole first floor had pro bono doctors from UCSF. And I see there are a couple of you here in the audience that helped us with this program. So I'm sure you remember how fantastic it was for someone who finally got into a unit to have medical care. So I could go on about this, and I don't have a lot of time, so I want to talk for a second about dirty streets and mental illness and substance abuse. But please look at the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. My goal today is to take people off the street within 72 hours, get them into some kind of, whether it's rehabilitation or whether it's a mental health issue, or whether indeed they can go right into housing. And that does exist. If you can get those that have been on the street not very long off, the sooner the better, you have much more of a probability of them staying off the streets. Right now, the largest group of homeless people, the new largest group of homeless people in the last year or 2 are unaccompanied women. A large degree of them have been sexually violated at some point in their life, so they're hiding. And you can tell a mile away what their issues are and how to help them. So of course, the first thing to do would be to help them get off the streets as soon as possible. And that is my goal. Ladies and gentlemen, I am in this race because of the homeless situation. I'm in this race because of people living in tents, in disgrace, in a billion-dollar city, in an iconic city. I'm in this race to stop the horror of living on the streets, the horror of sitting down at the BART station and shooting up and slumping over while people who are going to their jobs just walk by. I'm stunned by this. And let me just mention a segue to this. Now this is going to be a controversial topic, and I've never said this at a debate or in an endorsement. The amount of unconscionable money spent in this mayor's race. $4.8 million could have housed so many vets that tonight will be sleeping on our streets. This system is very messed up, very messed up. It's unconscionable to me that that kind of money can be spent in a mayor's race with 10, 15, 20 flyers that cost $100,000 each, while people are starving on our streets, while they're shooting up and basically killing themselves on our streets. So as mayor of San Francisco, my first job will be the chronically homeless. And obviously, an offshoot of that will be the newly homeless to help them get off the streets. And of course, help with the vet programs. I love the program that's in the Presidio. I love the program that's out at Treasure Island. Michael, I think those programs need to multiply. They work. Swords to Plowshare is perfect. It works. Why aren't we funding it? Why aren't we giving to the things we know? Oh my gosh, turns out I knew it. The things we know work. So, when I see people like Michael, or I see people like Ken, that are doing programs that are so wonderful, the program over near Lucasfilms in the Presidio, it works. Let's fund that instead of wasting money. I can go on about mental health and other things, but I'll take the questions and try to...
So the next 4 questions were compiled by the Veterans Affairs Commission, city agency.
Absolutely.
And they are preceded by an informational prompt from the San Francisco Veterans Study that I mentioned before. So here's question number 1. Over 40% of the post 9/11 veterans, the younger veterans in our community, and 20% of the pre 9/11 veterans, those mostly from the Vietnam era, have reported being homeless in the last year. On one hand, the San Francisco Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing has reported significant difficulties in getting landlords to take the vouchers. They're kind of like the Section 8 vouchers. On the other hand, many veterans that have unstable living arrangements do not meet the Department of Housing and Urban Development definition of homelessness. And single-room occupancy SRO housing is not appropriate for older veterans who really need wraparound services. So as mayor, what do you intend to do to make sure all veterans are appropriately housed in San Francisco?
Ladies and gentlemen, if I had to stop and pay attention to all the rules and regulations that had put on qualifying people to give them housing, we would not have housed the people that we housed. What we did was we went out and we got the buildings. At the time, we had 18 buildings in the pipeline. We took master leases on them. And we put people literally from the street into rehab, or from the street into mental health services with wraparound care, and then into the unit that would have, as I said, the minute clinic in the area. The frustration of picking someone up who has served so many years of their life for us in a war where they put their life on the line, and then we go try to get them the HUD services, and one of the restrictions is something to do with, where they were born, or some of the restrictions of HUD were just impossible for us to deal with. So what we really did was get as much state and, we also got as much federal help as we could. But we went to the Veterans Affairs Secretary. We got to know him. In other words, it's a one-on-one relationship. It's pick the phone up and say, "Hi, Secretary Principe, it's Angela in San Francisco. This is what is happening with this particular requirement. How do we overcome this requirement so that we can put Harry into the unit we have for him?" And I'm telling you, even on an individual basis, when you have a personal relationship with the people in Washington and the people in Sacramento, it changes everything. It changes everything. For the last 15 years of my life, when I see a homeless person on the street, I pick the phone up and I call Gavin. I say, "Gavin, this person is on Geary and Steiner. Please come pick them up." And then I wait until they pick up and I follow their progress. Dealing with homelessness and dealing with HUD regulations and dealing with state regulations is hard work. My goal is to put Harry into an apartment, or to put Harry into mental health services. That my goal. And if I have obstacles in the way, it sounds like, you know, this is easy to do. It isn't easy, but I do it anyway, and we did it, and we were highly, highly successful. So unfortunately, we also have a lot of local rules that are more onerous than the HUD rules. And that is something we can stop right away with the Board of Supervisors or a powerful mayor that cares.
Thank you. We should do this a little differently. Since we have 10 minutes for 4 questions, maybe we'll do a count up, and so you can hold 2 minutes when she goes to 2 minutes, or 3 minutes if she goes to 3 minutes. Can we do that? Okay, so that way you know.
Yeah.
All right. So question number 2, mental health. 1/3 of veterans have considered suicide or have made plans to end their life by suicide. 53% of post-9/11 veterans screened positive for PTSD. 64% screened positive for depression. Pre-9/11 veterans, PTSD of 41%, depression, and 35% for post-9/11 veterans are twice as likely. I'm sorry, I screwed that sentence up. Pre-9/11 veterans, PTSD, 41%, depression. Post-9/11 veterans are twice as likely as pre-9/11 veterans to engage in high-risk taking behaviors like driving after drinking alcohol, carrying a weapon, or looking to start a fight. Nearly 60% of post-9/11 veterans have a probable alcohol drinking problem. 50% of veterans have reported significant physical or mental health issues for which they are not receiving care. These numbers tell me that we are facing an unprecedented crisis in mental health issues and a wave of second-tier effects affecting the families, co-workers, and friends of veterans in our community. As mayor, what will you do to improve mental health services?
The idea of a mayor going out of her way to make it clear to the city's budget, to the city's departments, as I said before, they're all interdepartmental that deal with the mental illness of a vet. Okay, there's several departments. The idea of an active, advocating mayor would change that entire scenario, in my opinion. Let me just say one more time. This is a tough, tough issue. When I created the Mental Health Advisory Board in 1995, I was called crazy time and time again. People don't want to hear about mental illness, and they want to say to you, oh, tell them to get over it. I heard tell them to get over it so many times. But when you meet people on the streets that are homeless vets, that are clearly disabled because of the mental illness, they're the people you could help the easiest. Now let me just mention Project Homeless Connect. Is he timing me?
Yes.
Am I up already with that 2 minutes?
No.
Okay, I just don't want to go over the time. I just want to say, Project Homeless Connect, ladies and gentlemen, was a fantastic program. In other words, we've done things that work. Again, like swords to plowshare. We know what works. Let's multiply it. Let's multiply it. We don't have to recreate the wheel when we have something that works as wonderful as Swords to Plowshare, Project Homeless Connect, the 10-year plan to end chronic homelessness. All of these things address mental illness. The 10-year plan not only addressed mental illness, but I actually had psychiatrists come in from all over the nation to tell us what kind of vitamins we should be giving to those who are mentally ill on the street to try to help their brain repair while we were getting the housing, the permanent supportive housing. So you all should go to the city website and just put in chronic plan, and you'll see how extensive the parts on our veterans are, because veterans are a large, large percentage of it. An advocating loudmouth like me, I'm a loudmouth Sicilian, loudmouth person who understands mental health the way I have worked on it for the last 25, 30 years, is somebody in the mayor's office that would make a huge difference to those staggering statistics. And so hopefully you all vote for me #1, because this is one area I really know what I'm talking about.
Thank you. The third question is employment. Is this working? I'll just speak up. Veterans face a disproportionately high rate of unemployment and underemployment in San Francisco. 80% of service members leave the military without a job. And almost 60% of post-9/11 veterans in San Francisco reported that their military skills and experiences are dismissed by employers. As a result, 83% of post-9/11 veterans who work full-time have an annual salary that is below $60,000 a year, and 40% with jobs reported earning below $36,000 a year. That is simply not enough to survive, much less live a dignified life in this bourgeois town.
Right.
As mayor, what will you do to make sure veterans find appropriate employment in San Francisco?
You know, let me tell you a little bit about, I'm a civil rights lawyer, okay? I have represented many vets, and the discrimination against vets is stunning. When you add to the discrimination of someone who has gone to war for us, to protect us, when you add an age issue or a disability issue to it, it's almost impossible to find a job. So I have created something called a legacy tenant, and that is someone that has lived in their apartment more than, now I'm talking about evictions, because evictions is a big problem for our vets. A legacy tenant is someone who's lived in their apartment, who is no fault, who has paid their rent, cannot be moved from their apartment by any LS Act or any other act, cannot be evicted from their apartment if they have been there 10 years or more and they are a vet. So it's a dedicated type of housing for vets, teachers, nurses, and emergency services. Now, San Francisco's major affordable housing issue, you know what they're calling affordable housing? When I first started this race, I thought affordable housing was going to be $40,000. I mean, my clients, you know, make $25,000, $30,000, $50,000, $60,000. Affordable housing, as defined by San Francisco's percentage in putting it into a developer's new project, is $130,000. So where do the people making 50, 60, 70, 80, where do they live? Where do they live? So all throughout this mayor's race, we have developed, on my campaign, we have developed dedicated housing for people making anywhere from $40,000, $50,000, $60,000. Let me just give you an example that could be applicable to veterans, absolutely. And that is a 350-unit building for nurses only. No matter what their pay is, the rent is only a percentage of that pay. So if the nurse is making $50,000 or $40,000 and another one is making $130,000, their rent is dependent upon their amount of salary. And they're within distance of the hospital. So that kind of dedicated housing has to be done for people that make under $130,000. And that is something that, can you just imagine how wonderful it would be to actually give people really nice, decent housing and something they can afford that's dedicated for especially who they are, like a vet, like a nurse, like a teacher. So that housing issue is a huge issue, and discrimination of vets. I have won many trials for vets, but it's generally vets with disabilities or vets over 40 years old. The discrimination is terrible because they can hire people that are 22 years old that have all these new skills. So that is something I would fight vigorously, especially for city jobs. Our vets should have our city jobs.
Yes. Great. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, question number 4. We're past our 10 minutes, and we have
I'm sorry.
We had to rush through this. That's okay. Community. Nearly 75% of all veterans in San Francisco have reported difficulties adjusting to civilian life, and 33% reported that they do not know where to go or who to contact to get help. Nearly 2/3 of post-9/11 veterans indicate that civilians do not appreciate the sacrifices they've made, with more than 80% indicating that civilians don't understand their problems. As mayor, what will you do to help reintegrate veterans into our community?
All I can think of is, what comes to mind immediately with this question is Project Homeless Connect. When people came into Project Homeless Connect, we connected them with every possible funding source. We connected them with every possible, we would repair wheelchairs, every possible dentist appointment, every possible, it was a program that was so wonderful, and especially for vets, because we would connect them with all of the benefits. There's so many vets out there on the street that have no idea what they could possibly get from the government, whether it's the federal, state, or local government. And one other thing I just absolutely need to say here is we cannot let the federal government off the hook when it comes to our vets. They have got to pay attention and pay pay their dues to our vets instead of ignoring them, and that is so obvious in the homeless situation. So when it comes to services and things, dedicated services for vets is something that would make a world of difference for so many of the vets. Even those that have jobs don't really understand all the services they could get. And then when they get terminated, there need to be specific sanctions for terminating someone because they're a vet or of a certain age. And again, as a civil rights trial lawyer, I've been very, very successful at that, so I spotted a mile away.
Thank you. Let's have a round of applause for...
Of my heart, any of you who are vets or who are family who are vets, or I just can't believe your incredible dedication and service to our great country. Thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Wait a minute, I'd like to question.
Well, we really don't. We have structured questions.
I know you gave all the questions, now what about us in the audience?
Well,
I'm a veteran at Fort Mileage, and I'm representing the opioid replacement program of fellow veterans who have problems getting to the VA for their doses or for their mental health assistance. They take the community bus and they end up with a fine because they don't have the money for travel. So what about have the community provide free transportation services for all veterans?
That's absolutely something I would look at. Absolutely, I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
I think that's a great idea. And it wouldn't cost us anything the way we're spending it. I think that's a great idea. I'm going to adopt that in my campaign. I really like that. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we kind of structured this. There was something she dropped here.
Oh, my glasses. Thank you so much.
So, and I appreciate there's probably a number of questions. I have some myself. But we kind of structured it so every candidate gets the same opportunities, say, the same amount of time, answers the same questions. And I think that's really kind of only fair to get them all the same. And it's a great suggestion. I guess
all right, you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. My name is Pedro Hernandez. I'm the Deputy Director of Fair Vote California. We're an electoral reform organization based in San Francisco. We're a project of Fair Vote National that has pioneered and worked on issues like the national popular vote, universal registration. Our platform issue is ranked choice voting. San Francisco uses ranked choice voting to elect the mayor and board supervisors and other offices. It's been here since 2004, and it essentially eliminates the need for a runoff election. Ranked choice voting has also been used for overseas military workers from other states because oftentimes those voters can't return for a runoff, so they give them a ranked ballot. Essentially, it works like this. San Francisco voters will have a ballot with 3 columns where they can indicate their first choice, a second choice, and a third choice. Your first choice should be your favorite choice, someone that you most believe in. Then you can have a second choice, which is someone you like. And your third choice could be someone you can live with. The Department of Elections will count everyone's first choices. If a candidate has 50% plus 1 of first choice votes, they win, and it's over. But if no candidate has 50% plus 1 of votes, the candidate that comes in last is dropped, and the votes for that candidate go to the number 2 choices of those voters. So I'll say it again. The candidate that comes in last is dropped, and the votes for that candidate go to the voters' number 2 choices. And then they count again to see if someone has 50% plus 1. If not, you repeat that process looking at the number 2 or number 3 choices that are left available. It used to be the case that only 3 of 5 voters would return to the December runoff in San Francisco when we had December runoffs. With ranked choice voting, we've seen close to 87% of votes choices count in that final round. So that is a lot more representative of the electorate. We're looking to have it, so make sure to rank your ballot. Marking the same ballot, marking the same candidate 3 times doesn't help you because your vote will only be counted once for that candidate. Only indicating 1 choice also doesn't help your first choice because your number 2 or number 3 choice will only be counted if your first choice is defeated. So it's really important that you rank your ballot and make sure that your vote is heard. Thank you so much for being here. What a great showing of folks who really care about our city. I'm happy to answer questions on the way out. We also have some hand sanitizers and other swag that we have at the door, and some more literature if you need it in Spanish, and some ballot guides as well. Thank you so much.
So I think our other candidate hasn't shown up yet. Let's see, yes. My name is Paul Cox. I'm the chair of the American Commission here in this building, and I'll be moderating. You will have 10 minutes to present your Veterans Focus platform and another 10 minutes to answer 4 questions that have been collected by the Veterans Affairs Commission based on the State of the American Veterans study that was done last year by the University of Southern California. And then there's a little buffer for follow-up. Timekeeper's been assigned. David is sitting here in front of you. We'll give you the 5-minute, 3-minute, 2-minute, 30-second warning. And they will. So, do you have any questions before we proceed? Okay. Please go ahead and introduce the commission.
If it's okay, I'm just going to stand here so I can be closer to the audience. Thank you so much for hosting all of the mayoral candidates here today. It's really an honor to be with our veterans here in San Francisco. Thank you so much for your service to our country. We all depend so much on your leadership, your dedication, and the work that you do both here in our country and abroad. So thank you very much. I have had also the honor of serving our city and county a little over the last decade. I started out on the San Francisco Board of Education and now serve on the Board of Supervisors. I represent a very dynamic and challenging district which includes the South Market, Tenderloin, Treasure Island, and Mission Bay. I represent the poorest residents of San Francisco, and as of 3 years ago, I represent the wealthiest zip code as well. Almost every single adult homeless shelter is also in the district I represent, and almost every single tech company you've heard of is in the district that I represent. Close to 80% of all of San Francisco's residential and commercial development is also happening in the district that I represent. And so I spent quite a bit of time working on issues around housing and land use and helping to shape the future of San Francisco neighborhoods. I'm proud to have led the initiative to make San Francisco the only city in the nation to make community college free again for all of our residents via Proposition W. I'm also proud to have fought for, negotiated, and won more affordable and middle-income housing than any other member of the Board of Supervisors over the last 8 years. And I've also been the author of the Tenant Protection Ordinance in 2015, after which we have been seeing a drop in low-fault evictions throughout our city here in San Francisco. I'm also the district where Source to Plowshare is a resident, and I'm proud to have worked with them on several homeless and veteran housing here in our city on Treasure Island at 150 Otis. I am absolutely committed to continuing Mayor Edley's promise to get to zero on veteran homelessness. Homelessness is a crisis that exists here in our city, but not just in San Francisco, in cities across the nation. And it's something that began to emerge in the 1980s when we began to cut funding to HUD. In fact, prior to that, HUD's budget used to be larger than the Department of Defense, and we used to have more public housing units than people on the wait list. We absolutely need to invest in subsidized housing, and having worked with market rate developers the last 8 years, I get why. Market rate housing simply does not pencil out for the poor, the working class, and now in San Francisco, even the middle class needs to be subsidized to be able to stay here in San Francisco. I do believe that one of the most urgent questions pressing San Francisco today is who gets to live here? Who gets to live in this great city with our progressive laws and our programs and policies? And we have to ensure that San Francisco is a city for all of us. I did just want to go straight to Q&A, and also, I don't know if you take questions from the audience as well.
We weren't planning on it, no. We have these 4 structured questions.
Okay, got it.
And we can go, if you're ready
Yeah.
for that, rock and roll. So the first question, you just talked about homelessness. So let me give you a little rundown. Over 40% of the post-9/11 veterans, that is the younger veterans, And 20% of the pre-9/11 veterans, those mostly Vietnam era shortly after, have reported being homeless in the past years. On one hand, the San Francisco Department of Homelessness and Supported Housing has reported significant difficulties getting landlords to take cutback housing. On the other hand, many veterans that have unstable living arrangements do not meet the Department of Housing and Urban Development definition of homelessness. And single-room occupancy housing is just not appropriate, especially for our older veterans who need rapid services. As mayor, what do you intend to do to make sure all veterans are appropriately housed?
So we focus a lot on the roughly 7,000 people that are in our homeless count. This is a rough estimate of the number of people who sleep on our streets or in our shelters on any given night. But our homeless count is far larger. It's closer to 20,000 unique individuals that interface with our homeless support services system on any given year, which means that not everyone that is homeless sleeps on the streets every single night. People couch surf, they sleep in cars, sleep on the streets some nights, not on other nights, when they're able to scrounge up money for a hotel. And then, of that 20,000, there's a roughly 3,000 that we estimate that are chronically homeless, that are living on our streets every single night, that are likely also struggling with mental health illnesses and substance abuse, what we call the triple diagnosis. For this group of folks, we know that homelessness is also a public health crisis, and we must address it as such. It is not just a poverty and economic issue. We must build more medical shelter beds staffed by nurses, clinicians, and psychologists. I'm proud to have expanded our first medical shelter on Mission Street between 7th and 8th. That is staffed by the Department of Public Health. We're actually able to treat people who are sick on our streets, and we have to greatly expand this program. It's unfortunately very expensive, which is why the city has been reluctant to do it, because it doesn't always feel like the most cost-effective way to address street homelessness. However, while we wait for housing, we have to simply get people off the streets. Now, specifically for veterans who have access to HUD vouchers, which is an amazing resource, we have to get them to housing. One of the things that I would like to propose is creating a type of closed circuit universe, putting together, pairing veterans and landlords together. I think some of the hesitation from landlords is making sure that they're taking in a tenant that I guess isn't going to cause issues or problems for them in the long term. And there are systems that we've seen in other countries. In Korea, for example, they have a closed system where they vet applicants, both landlords and tenants, largely students and recent graduates of college, to actually rent from seniors who have an extra room in their house. And so I think that we can create a similar type of system where we interview and vet both landlords and veterans looking for housing and try to create a better relationship of trust, because one of the biggest issues that I hear from landlords is a fear of, I think, kind of just going out there and just taking anyone in, and we have to provide a positive experience and some sort of stability that we can provide both to the veteran tenant and to the landlord as well. In the long term, we simply must build more affordable and middle-income housing. And as I said, when this country was in the business of building housing, homelessness was not a crisis on our streets. It really began to emerge in the 1980s when we began cutting funding to HUD. And we cut HUD's funding by 50% between 1980 and 2002. And there's a great graph, you can look it up online. As we stopped subsidizing the production of housing in Section 8, homelessness began to emerge as a crisis on our streets. I'm also supporting a $300 million gross receipts measure for the November ballot. It is a tax on companies that make $50 million or more. This $300 million will go towards building supportive housing, behavioral health treatment, substance abuse, and other types of affordable housing here in San Francisco. And let me tell you why this is so significant. Our current budget for homelessness is roughly about $250 million a year. 60% of which actually houses people, 10,000 people that you no longer see on our streets today. This would double our budget. And the last time San Francisco voted on new revenue for affordable housing, it was a $310 million bond in 2015 that is going to be spent over the course of a decade. This will be $300 million every single year, and we're going to be able to finally provide people not just housing, but the supportive services that they need to get back on their feet.
Second question is on mental health, the third is on employment, and the fourth is on community. So let's go to the second. Okay. 1/3 of veterans have considered suicide or have made plans to end their life by suicide. 53% of post-9/11 veterans screened positive for PTSD. 64% screened positive for depression. Pre-9/11 veterans have PTSD at rates of 41%, and depression at 35%. So these are significant numbers. Post-9/11 veterans are twice as likely as pre-9/11 veterans to engage in high-risk taking behaviors like driving after drinking alcohol, carrying a weapon, or looking to start a fight. Nearly 60% of post-9/11 veterans have a probable alcohol drinking problem. 50% of our veterans have reported a significant physical or mental health issue for which they are not receiving care. These numbers tell me that we are facing an unprecedented crisis in mental health issues and a wave of second-tier effects affecting families, co-workers, and friends of veterans in our community. As mayor, what will you do to improve mental health services?
I think this is another pressing issue that we as a nation have not been dealing with. And it's not just for those that are indigent or in poverty. We frankly don't address mental health at any class. In fact, I was talking with the new director of psychiatry at UCSF, who had come to my office to talk about a capital campaign that UCSF was beginning to build a psychiatric hospital in Mission Bay, Dogpatch. And this is just for their members. This wasn't even to serve folks that are out of network. And he was telling me that they were having trouble fundraising because while everyone wants their name on the Women and Children's Hospital and the Cancer Hospital, no one was as excited to have their name on the psychiatric hospital. So we have a lot of work to do in this country. I know it's humorous and it's not humorous at the same time. We have a lot of work to do to reduce stigma around mental health. I have a very close member of my family who is struggling with mental health illness, and it is so hard on his parents. And you know, one of the reasons why it is so important to me to serve all of our residents, including our residents in the Tenderloin, is that I see my family member, and if he wasn't able to get this literal persistent support and tenacious support, that he would also be in our single-room occupancy hotels or in our single-adult homeless shelters. And I know that our veterans experience at a much higher rate, which is why I want to thank you so much for what you do, because you literally put your bodies and your hearts on the line when you serve our country, and what you see and experience is indescribable, I think, for so many of us. And having friends that have served, having worked with people that have served and have disappeared for periods of time when they seem perfectly normal on those days, just goes to show how difficult this experience is. We must invest in behavioral health and mental health services, and we have to take away the stigma in getting help. It is expensive. It is why our country probably doesn't invest in it as much as it should, but we simply have to, because if we don't address it, what we see on our streets today is just going to continue to explode. Not just the mental health, but the substance abuse that follows along with it as well.
Thank you. The third question is on employment. Veterans face a disproportionately high rate of unemployment and underemployment in San Francisco. 80% of service members leave the military without a job, and almost 60% of post-9/11 veterans in San Francisco reported that their military skills and experiences are dismissed by their employers or potential employers. As a result, 83% of post-9/11 veterans who work full-time have an annual salary that is below $60,000. And veterans who work full-time have an annual salary that is below $60,000 a year, and 40% of veterans with jobs reported earning below $36,000 a year. That's like dinner. That is simply not enough to survive, much less live a dignified life in this bourgeois town. As mayor, what will you do to make sure veterans find appropriate employment in San Francisco?
So we don't do a very good job with employment training really anywhere here in our city. We have to really beef up our employment training programs and also our programs at City College. There are jobs also that, but let me backtrack a little bit. We know the future of work is also changing with technology, automation, algorithms, and that many of the jobs that exist today that are often solid blue-collar, middle-class jobs are going to go away. But new jobs will also be created via these arenas. But there are certain areas like continuum of care, early childhood education, healthcare, IHSS workers, which are simply poverty jobs that we need to invest in to to make middle-class jobs as well. I want to work with our Veterans Commission on figuring out how we can do a better job of training our veteran employee and also working with employers to hire them. We have a huge tech industry here that is the fastest growing engine of our economy here today, and we need to simply prepare our veterans who are coming home for the jobs that we are creating, whether they're in technology or construction or in healthcare. But I want to work with you in figuring out what are the best ways to train and uptrain and upskill our workforce here in San Francisco, and then actually connect you to employers that are here in San Francisco.
Thank you. The fourth question is, community. Nearly 75% of all veterans in San Francisco have reported difficulties adjusting to civilian life, and 33% reported that they do not know where to go, who to contact to get help. Nearly 2/3 of post-9/11 veterans indicated that civilians do not appreciate the sacrifices they've made, with more than 80% indicating that civilians don't understand their problems. As mayor, what will you do to help reintegrate veterans in the community?
Well, I should first ask of the veterans that are here in the room today, how many of you come here to the War Memorial regularly for services and attending commission meetings? Only one, okay. Oh, okay.
And I have a question.
Okay, I'm not the moderator, so I'll let Mr. Cox determine that. I actually started out as a community organizer for several years, and I also served at Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights before I got on the board of supervisors. And when I ran, people often told me that I would need 3 or 4 different platforms to run in the district that I run in. As I mentioned, the diversity. One morning I would be on the St. Anthony's breakfast line. The next morning I would be at the Blue Bottle line. And I remember my campaign manager calling it whiplash. One day at a single room occupancy hotel, the next day at a condo. But through this door knocking, I actually learned something that was incredibly important, which is that all of us actually want the same things. We want to live in safer neighborhoods. We all believe in affordable housing. We want a quality school in our neighborhood. But I knew I had to do a lot of work to build community in my district as well, because people didn't often identify each other with one another. And so the very first issue that I took up on the Board of Supervisors is something that was considered milquetoast. It was pedestrian safety. And the reason why I took on this issue was numerous. One, more people are killed by cars than by guns here in San Francisco. And unlike other cities in our country, we actually built a lot of nice neighborhoods around our freeways. It's usually poor neighborhoods that are surrounding our freeways. And so when I was campaigning, I wanted to tell everyone that everyone knew someone that had been hit or killed by a car collision. And that was the same in Rincon Hill and South Beach as well, because those neighborhoods are along the 80, the 101, and the 280. And so my first 6 years in office, I put together a monthly task force where I had our condo homeowners, our SRO tenants, our Latino and Filipino families in West Soma come together to talk about this issue, to build community within the district that I represent. Just as important as it is to provide services, we must invest in organizing. I really believe in investing in organizing. I believe that investing in organizing is what makes our neighborhoods stronger and what makes our community stronger as well. A lot of our well-to-do business interests, private sector interests, can hire lobbyists, can bring together councils that bring their interests together. Veterans, small business owners, those that are homeless, low-income and working-class and middle-class families don't have that as well. I believe in funding organizing, and I would love to fund organizing in our veteran community here in San Francisco. One, so we can identify more of you that haven't registered, bring you into services, connect you to the community, and build more community building engagement, which I believe not only builds those relationships of trust, but actually also eventually get people access to housing and employment as well. And also funding great nonprofit organizations that do this work.
Please join me in thanking this panel.
I want to be committed to meeting with our veterans here in San Francisco, and so making sure that I sit down with you to understand what you believe are the best solutions in addressing the questions that you brought forward today. The final thing I will just say is this: we have a huge access to justice issue in our country, meaning that we have great laws, But if you're not privileged enough to be able to hire an attorney or find access to legal services, you will not be protected by those laws at the same rate as those that have access to attorneys can. It is why I'm fighting for Proposition F, right to counsel in eviction proceedings, but I think that we need to rethink what access to justice means in our city, and also what we can do to support our veterans with legal services as well. Thank you very much.
I believe our next candidate is waiting in the wings. And again, I apologize for not taking questions and comments from the participants, but we think it's important that every candidate gets exactly the same opportunities, okay? So if they fail to cover your topic, you'll have to find them some other venue to do. So thank you for coming today. Each candidate will have 10 minutes to present their veteran-focused platform and another 10 minutes to answer 4 questions that have been collected and vetted by the Veterans Affairs Commission based on the State of the American Veteran Study by USC last year. And then there will be a 10-minute follow-up for which those 4 questions you'll have 10 minutes to answer all 4 questions. A timekeeper's been assigned. David's sitting here. He'll give you the 5, 3, 2, 30-second thing, and then he'll stand up on the screen. Probably. And then, do you have any questions before we start?
So if I keep my questions, I answer the 4 questions within the 10 minutes, or the last 10 minutes would be for any further explanation, or are there additional questions from the audience? Or?
So you have 10 minutes to make a presentation.
Right.
10 more minutes to make, so a total of 20.
To answer the 4 questions.
To answer the 4 questions.
So for 10 minutes.
There is a 30 minutes.
Oh, it's just 20 minutes.
Yes. There's a little bit of slack in here, not a lot.
So it's 20, not 30.
That's cool.
Okay.
We're trying to take people at 30-minute interval, so we're not. So please, have at it.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Victor. Thanks to all of you on the Veterans Affairs Commission and all those who participate in the important community work to make sure that our veterans are afforded the appropriate respect and dignity and validation of not only their years of service, but also their presence and residency here in San Francisco. So I am Mark Leno, and I have been a small business owner here in San Francisco for the past 40 years, and also have served on the County Board of Supervisors for 4 years, back in 1998 to 2002. At which time I went off to the state legislature, serving 6 years in the state assembly and 8 years in the state senate. And we did a lot of good work while we were in the legislature. Much of it overlapped with many of the issues that we're going to be talking about here today, given that about 80% of those leaving the military leave without a job. There are severe challenges to mental and behavioral health, risks of suicide, access to programs and services that are there for veterans. I know we'll dig into all of that. While in the Assembly, I was able to exempt from the Ellis Act single-room occupancies, which house about 12,000 of San Francisco's most vulnerably housed. Oftentimes they are seniors on fixed income, those with disabilities, and oftentimes those living in our SROs are also veterans. And we protected all 12,000 by exempting them from the risk of being wholesale evicted through the Ellis Act. We are also able to raise California's minimum wage, first state in the country to raise California's minimum wage to $15 an hour. And of course, many of our veterans are also earning minimum wage. So overall in California, 5.8 million Californians will get a raise as a result of that legislation, and another 2 million Californians will be lifted out of poverty, as it will no longer be legal to pay a sub-poverty wage in the state of California. As chair of the Senate Budget Committee, I was able to bring home $120 million to save City College when it was in the depths of its accreditation crisis. As the accreditation was threatened, enrollment plummeted. Funding from the state is based on enrollment numbers. As they fell further, state funding fell further, and the college was in the death spiral. So we were able to bring home $120 million for 4 years of stabilization in its funding. And of course, City College is a gateway for anyone's future success. And that includes many veterans who are returning to San Francisco. And just as we now have free City College, my proposal is that if you are able to get your AA degree at City College, we'll not only have a place for you at San Francisco State University, but I want to make that free state, just as we have free city. And that will benefit all of those who are with access to that degree, but also given that Californians can have a million Bachelor of Arts degree deficit by 2030. Many of the new jobs are going to require advanced education. We want to make sure our residents are having access to that education. And then also, with regard to the issue of housing, as California was closing down its redevelopment agencies, we always had a pot of money through redevelopment to build affordable housing. That was at risk of being deleted as well. I was able to make the argument to Governor Brown that we have legally enforceable obligations at 3 redevelopment project sites: Mission Bay, Trans Bay, and Hunters Point Shipyard. And with that successful argument that I made to the Governor, I brought back $500 million to expedite the construction of 3,300 below market rate affordable housing units for San Francisco. And those 3,300 affordable units are now under construction. I also focused on a number of veteran-specific bills when I was in the legislature. For one, I authored a bill that would have did create actually, a peer and family support specialist certification program operated under the Department of Healthcare Services, so that for those who are offering support for those dealing with mental health issues, whether it is a peer, someone who's been through it him or herself before, or a family member, there could be a certification so that these people could get paid for the services they are providing. Before this bill, that was not the case. Also, we successfully moved through a bill that protects seniors from financial predators. There were scams set up to invite senior veterans to come talk about financial issues, and then the scam would be that they would be directed into annuities and other kinds of programs that made the salesperson a huge commission, but in fact destroyed the finances of these senior veterans, and so they are now protected from these scams. And then I know that a lot of seniors are suffering because though they struggle to get Section 8 housing vouchers, so often landlords will not accept these federally funded Section 8 housing vouchers. And so because they are a protected source of income, we wanted to put that into law. If you looked at Craigslist for apartments available, you would actually see listed no Section 8, no Section 8, no Section 8. And I thought, how can that be allowable? How can that be legal? You can't imagine an advertisement say, no Jews, no gays, no Chinese. How could it be no Section 8? This is a secure source of income, a protected source of income. Unfortunately, we had to fight the industry over this, and we weren't successful. They were able to stop our bill. But as mayor, I would not only lobby Sacramento to bring that bill back, but also sit down with the apartment association. I know that they've got problems with the federal government, with housing and urban development, that it takes a long time for them to get their payments from the government, that it can be months that they'll have vacancies in their units. That's a problem, and I want to help them address it, but there's no reason to discriminate against people who are holding Section 8 housing vouchers. So let me just tell you that as mayor, my vision of the city is that this would be a veteran welcoming city, it would be a veteran serving city, and it would be a veteran safe city. We know that we've seen the number of chronically homeless veterans in San Francisco decreasing in recent years. Thanks to President Obama's leadership in making it a nationwide effort to make sure we house every veteran. Mayor Ed Lee did partner with the president on that, and we made some great progress. From 350 chronically homeless veterans in San Francisco in 2014 down to 196 in 2015, and now down to 137 in 2017. But that's still 137 too many. And I know that Ed Kaczynski, the director of the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing, has said that he wants to get that figure to 0 by the end of 2018. I fully support that. And should we be fortunate for the department to get to that goal by the end of this year, then it is a consistent, ongoing challenge to keep it there. Doesn't mean the problem's been solved, doesn't mean the work is over. That means we've just got to keep it up and make sure that we continue to house every veteran. I also want to bring note of the fact that the survey in the study pointed out that 1/3 of our veterans don't even know where to look for or where to access services. So that's very serious. 1/3 is a good percentage number. And if folks are just out there without even knowledge of what kind of services there are in accessing housing or mental or physical health provision, or for educational opportunities or job training opportunities, much less job placement, then we're failing our veterans. So I will be focusing on that in particular. And then there's also the issue of non-honorable discharges. And non-honorable discharges, of course, can destroy someone's future opportunities. And I know that there's a suggestion, a proposal, and I know this would have to happen at the federal government, that a single day of honorable service would afford one an honorable discharge. And I think that needs to be revisited. I think that's a seriously important idea because all of the outcomes for non-honorable dischargees are much more severe than for those with honorable discharges. And lastly, the issue of risk of suicide is a very serious one. We've seen the numbers are off the charts. Upwards of 50% of San Francisco veterans are at risk of suicide, which is 50% higher than for non-veterans. We've got to provide the services, we've got to do the outreach, so our veterans know not only are those services available, but that San Francisco cares, and that San Francisco is here for you.
So the next 4 questions, as I mentioned, will cover 4 different topics, most of which you touched on. Homelessness, mental health, employment, and community. Okay? So the first question on homelessness, over 40% of post-9/11 veterans, the younger veterans in our community, and 20% of the pre-9/11 veterans, most of them from Vietnam era, have reported being homeless in the past year. On one hand, the San Francisco Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing has reported significant difficulties in getting landlords to take that action, which you discussed. On the other hand, many veterans have unstable living arrangements that do not meet the Department of Housing and Urban Development definitions of homelessness. And single-room occupancy housing is really not appropriate for many older veterans who need wraparound services. As mayor, what would you do to make sure that all veterans are appropriately housed in San Francisco?
Certainly. So I do have a general and very bold, let's call it audacious program goal to end street homelessness in San Francisco by 2020. That addresses a population of about 3,500 who are on San Francisco streets, living there day and night. So veterans, of course, would be a subset of that 3,500, but because there is some federal support for veterans that there does not exist for non-veterans, this is a special opportunity for San Francisco to be able to make use of the federal programs. And so we've got to make sure we're getting everything out of the federal government as possible. There's a little bit coming from the state, but different from those who are not veterans, we've got some opportunities and we should be able to leverage them as well. The program that I put forward for the general population makes use of both single-room occupancies. There are estimates of about 1,500 empty, available SROs in town right now. That's minimal housing, yes, but for someone who's homeless, it is a roof over their head. And it's also important to find a roof for everyone who's homeless, because I believe strongly in the concept of housing first, that there are many reasons why someone finds his or her way to the streets. With regard to veterans, of course, it could be PTSD, it could be depression, other aspects of mental and physical health that are the result of having served in the military and for our country. But before we can deal with whatever those reasons might be, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, housing first, to be able to deal with these very complex issues, oftentimes psychologically driven, it's not going to be done successfully on the street corner. So housing first, and then we can get to the core of the problem. Yes, it takes time. Yes, it takes diligence. Yes, it takes concern and care. But we can do this, and we can certainly do much better than the status quo, which I believe is failing us and not providing us what we deserve coming from City Hall. Should I miss your last prompt? I'm out of time on this one. That's okay. I'll watch more carefully. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So the next question is on mental health, also touched on. 1/3 of the veterans have considered suicide or have made plans to end their life by suicide. More than half of the veterans screen positive for PTSD and depression. Post 9/11 veterans are twice as likely as pre-9/11 veterans to engage in high-risk taking behaviors like driving after drinking alcohol, carrying a weapon, or looking to start a fight. Nearly 60% of post 9/11 veterans have probable drinking problems. 50% of veterans have reported a significant physical or mental health issue for which they are not receiving care. These numbers tell me we are facing an unprecedented crisis in mental health issues and a wave of second-tier effects affecting families, co-workers, and friends of veterans in their community. As mayor, what will you do to improve mental health services in San Francisco?
Certainly. So with regard to mental health services and provision of that, not unlike housing, there is the opportunity to be partnering with the Veterans Administration to get everything that we can out of the federal government to help us assist and deal with those who are living in San Francisco in need of these services. And as I mentioned earlier, it's very disconcerting to me that 1/3 of our veterans don't even know where to turn or that they can access services either provided through the VA or through our county government system. So there's need for greater outreach. We've got to be proactive in meeting veterans where they are so that they can find out from us where they can turn, and we bring services to them if they don't know enough to come to us to access them. With the greater issue of mental health service provision here in San Francisco, I'm proposing a mental health justice center. So many of our homeless who interact with the city is through police and law enforcement. They get taken to county jail, they spend a few days in jail. 50% of those in our county jail are receiving mental health services, 20% psychotropic drugs. No one is getting better in a jail cell. We're wasting a lot of money. These folks are then released back to the street without a health plan, without a case manager, a treatment plan, and the cycle repeats itself, and we're not making any kind of progress. So the alternative would be a mental health justice center, very similar to what they're doing in Alameda County, very successfully. They call it psychiatric emergency services. They've got a place where folks dealing with mental and behavioral health and addiction issues can go, not to the emergency room, where the emergency rooms are not, and the docs there are not trained for this population, but a place specifically for them that is not law enforcement, that is not our county jail, so that we can assess and diagnose and then treat and stabilize these mental health crises. And then, of course, the question is, where are we going to put them? The good news is I was able to access $100 million from the state of California before I left the Senate Budget Committee, specifically for San Francisco. It's $2 billion statewide, $100 million for San Francisco, earmarked to build permanent supportive housing for formerly homeless people with mental health issues. We could build upwards of 400 units of permanent supportive housing for those with mental health issues who have been living on the streets. And so that would take us a step forward in a very significant way, a place for those we don't have today with mental health needs, under a roof with permanent supportive housing and the wraparound services necessary.
Thank you so much. Next question is on employment.
Yes.
Veterans face a disproportionately high rate of unemployment and underemployment in San Francisco. 80% of service members leave the military without a job, and almost 60% of post 9/11 veterans in San Francisco reported that their military skills and experiences are dismissed by employers. As a result, 83% of post 9/11 veterans who work full-time have an annual salary that is below $60,000. 40% have jobs that earn less than $36,000 a year. That is simply not enough to survive, much less thrive a dignified, and much less live a dignified life. As mayor, what will you do to make sure veterans find appropriate employment in San Francisco?
Thank you, Paul. So again, not unlike our general population right now, we need to make sure we get much more out of the extraordinary success and expansion of new industries in San Francisco. Whether it's the tech sector or any other new burgeoning business sector, my question always is, what's in it for San Franciscans? Yeah, we know there are a lot of corporations and a lot of titans in those corporations who are becoming billionaires and millionaires overnight. But what about San Franciscans? You know, we've created tens of thousands of new jobs here recently. And the presumption is all of these new jobs are going to be taken by people coming from out of town. And we see our population increasing, which puts a demand on our housing. We're having trouble keeping up with housing supply. I want to see a much greater percentage of these new jobs created locally hired. Local hire, this is the mantra you're going to hear from me very often. We have a local hire requirement in the building trades, but why should it be limited to the building trades? We're creating all these new jobs. Don't tell me we don't have underemployed, educated, well-prepared San Franciscans to take some of these jobs. So that's my general riff on how we should be better and more focused on the well-being of San Franciscans as we continue to give permits and entitlements for these new industries to build more corporate offices and more commercial space so they can hire more people. Again, what's in it for us? San Franciscans should benefit from this wave of prosperity. Now, segueing to the needs, the special needs of veterans, I would carve out a special sector of focus for veterans employment. And a sector of that local hiring should be for veterans, just as we have a special attention on housing homeless veterans, we should have special attention on employing veterans who are either unemployed or underemployed. That means outreach. That means working with these new industries to find out, yes, I understand a small percentage of them will be for very highly trained technical folks. There'll be worldwide searches for the best and the brightest. But what percentage of these are administrative jobs? What percentage of these are marketing jobs or sales jobs? Jobs that we know San Franciscans could fill, and jobs that we know that veterans could fill. So I'll be focusing on locally hiring and locally hiring veterans.
Thank you for that. The last question is community. Nearly 75% of all veterans in San Francisco have reported difficulties adjusting to civilian life, and 33% report that they do not know where to go or who to contact to get help. Nearly 2/3 of post 9/11 veterans indicated that civilians do not appreciate the sacrifices they've made, with more than 80% indicating that civilians don't understand their problems. As mayor, what will you do to help reintegrate veterans into our community?
You know, this goes back to some fundamental changes that this country made. When I was a young man, the Vietnam War was raging. Clearly there was a lot of debate over the value of that war, riots in the streets. A lot of veterans came home feeling unappreciated. In fact, often feeling as if they were fighting, that the impression they were getting from parts of the general public is that they were fighting a war that wasn't worth fighting, which only doubled their suffering. But at the time we had a draft, and everyone was eligible, short of some so-called presidents that kept getting deferments for some sort of spur. I don't know what that was all about. But otherwise, it was a sacrifice spread more equally and equitably across the country. I'm not suggesting that there's a draft coming back to the United States. No, it's not going to happen. Because it's so much easier for this country to keep letting our leaders take us into wars, and wars that may be unnecessary and put too many people in harm's way, if we just leave it to a certain portion of our populace to go do that work for us. But the rest of us will be spared. So there's inequity in the very foundation of how we serve our country today. And so it's no surprise that when people come back from service, that they're not going to be understood by the general public who never had to sacrifice anything. So there are a couple of ways to go about this. I think that, of course, we need more outreach, just as we do in access to the services, but for the reintegration of veterans. Veterans represent every creed, color, race, nation of origin, sexual orientation, gender identity, is all the rest of us. And so, might veterans find a place to reintegrate if they were from the LGBT community at the LGBT Community Center? And might a veteran from the African American community find better reentry in some African American Community Center? Where we have centers set up, let's make that a portal of reentry for our veterans. But beyond that, maybe the city should be talking about it. I'm not here to suggest that I know anything more. I, as mayor, would very much follow the recommendations that come from the Veteran Affairs Commission. That's why we have a commission, to review all the many needs of our community, our veterans community, and make recommendations to the Board of Supervisors and to the mayor. But one idea that I might like to float is, might we benefit, all of us, from a veterans community center? So we could have a general place where veterans could know they feel at home. It would be a one-stop shop for veterans to be able to learn about and access all the many services that are there for them. So I think my time's up. Do I make a closing statement? I hope I've stayed close to my time with it. Thank you. I've had the pleasure of getting to know some of the commissioners over the years, and I've learned a lot from my good friend Victor Oliveri, now serving on the commission, and the complexities of the challenges facing the veterans community are real and many. And as a public official over these past 18 years, I've always been able to do my best when I learn and when I close my mouth and I open my ears and I listen. Because that's when I'm better informed as to what any one community throughout the diverse communities of San Francisco actually need. And those of us in public service should be here serving those needs. So I want to work together with you, the veterans community. I want to learn from you, I want to learn from the commissioners, and then we set a plan of action, and then we execute that plan of action so that as much of our veterans community receives the respect and dignity in terms of housing, food security. That's another point that was made in the report. Off the charts number of veterans who don't even know where the next meal is coming from. The mental and physical health services that they need, access to job training and job placement, all of those needs. And set a course of action, execute it, and make sure everyone is cared for. Thank you very much.
Can you speak up if you're going to bulldog this? Go ahead, speak up anyway, so people can hear you.
Question that they have asked me to ask.
Of course, go ahead.
Okay, a lot of veterans are getting ticketed for not having to fare for community buses coming from the Central One all the way for Florida. They can't make it to the services that they need. I would like to see free community services for veterans in need of services at the VA hospital.
Can I respond? I'm sorry, your name again? Joseph. Joseph, thank you very much for the question, Joseph. You pointed out something I overlooked. in my comments because transportation is a major issue. To be able to get to appointments, to be able to get health service, to be able to go for a job interview, all of that requires a transit system that works, that is dependable, and that is affordable. And so, yes, I would agree with you. I like the idea of free muni service for veterans. And how far we are able to expand it, that's open to discussion. But minimally, to get to appointments, you bet, that's something we should have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have one more candidate, Ms. London Breed. I think she's ready to come in, so if we'll wait just a moment, I think she'll be here shortly. Please. Good afternoon again. This is Ms. London Breed. Thank you so much for taking time out of this campaign to meet with us. So each candidate has had 10 minutes to make a presentation and then an additional 10 minutes to answer 4 questions concerning homelessness, mental health, employment, and community. And those questions are based on the State of the American Veteran study that was done last year by the University of Southern California here in San Francisco. So if a timekeeper is assigned, David is here, he will let you know how your time is run. So please, have that.
Thank you. Hi everybody, my name is London Breed. I'm president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, running for mayor here in San Francisco. In fact, I actually grew up here, born and raised. My mom actually was born and raised here as well. I grew up in Western Addition in public housing. And I went to public schools here in San Francisco and was really fortunate because in my community, the challenges that exist, the violence, the hopelessness, the drugs, the frustration, the despair, that was what my normal was. And so a lot of my life has been dedicated to working in the community. After I finished at UC Davis, I came back. I was working in the neighborhood, working with young people. In fact, I served as the executive director of the African American Art and Culture Complex for 10 years, where I worked during a time where we were dealing with a lot of violence, a lot of challenges in the community before I ran for the Board of Supervisors. I actually got my graduate degree from USF, and I served on the Fire Commission and the Redevelopment Agency Commission during a time when I was working for the Treasure Island Development Authority. Before becoming a member of the Board of Supervisors, like I said, my work and my life has been dedicated to working in the community, and I'm proud of being able to help address many of the challenges that exist. But I ran for the Board of Supervisors in 2012 because I felt that we needed a voice. We needed to make sure that we were connecting the dots between what was happening in neighborhoods all over San Francisco, the policies that we create, as well as how San Francisco spends money and how it impacts the rest of the community. So I've been on the Board of Supervisors for 5 years now, and not everything about being on the board is about policy. In fact, one of the first things that I was able to do is get Mayor Ed Lee to give $2 million to the San Francisco Housing Authority. We rehabilitated 179 empty public housing units that had been empty for years, and we placed 179 formerly homeless families in those units. I helped to pass neighborhood preference legislation because in the Western Addition, where so many people have been priced out or pushed out, we would build housing and it would be difficult for people living in our community to access the new developments being built there. I led the effort to pass neighborhood preference legislation so that 40% of all new units go to the people who actually live in our community. So why am I running for mayor? I have a bold and creative vision to help us address many of the challenges that exist in our city and have existed for far too long. Issues around homelessness, housing and public safety, transportation. How do we as a city move the city forward without making sure that all of those things work hand in hand? On homelessness, during the very brief time that I served as acting mayor, I was so honored to cut the ribbon on the Auburn Hotel. 70 new housing units for 70 formerly homeless veterans. I know that Mayor Ed Lee made a commitment to end veteran homelessness, and he had been well on his way to doing that. As mayor, that is one of my commitments. How do we address issues around homelessness? We know people who are living on our streets sadly suffer from mental illness, sadly suffer from addiction, and just because we don't want to see those things doesn't mean that it's just going to go away. I want to reform our mental health system. I don't want our jails to continue to be used as a place for people who are mentally ill. Folks are locked up, 72 hours later, they're right back in the same place with no help and no assistance. We need to stop treating it like a criminal issue and treat it like the public health crisis that it is. I've already proposed legislation. I've already worked to open 54 new mental health stabilization beds. And as mayor, I plan to hold all hospitals accountable to have facilities for us to work with people struggling with mental illness. Also, I'm proposing something very controversial, safe injection sites. Now, I'm proposing it not to make it convenient for people who are struggling with addiction to use drugs. You see the needles on our streets. You see people who are shooting up openly, and those are also people who need help. I sadly lost a sister to a drug overdose in the city, and every time she would call me asking for help, I would go down to the Tenderloin looking for her, and she's nowhere to be found. What safe injection sites could provide is not just a place for people who have challenges with addiction to just shoot up. It's a place to provide treatment on demand. It's a place to provide somewhere for someone to go if they need help. Combining services and support with these safe injection sites is something that I think can help us address this issue and also can hopefully help us give people the treatment that they need. It's working in places like Vancouver, Canada, a place where I had an opportunity to visit and see how much cleaner the streets are, but more importantly, over 3,400 people referred to detox who have not gone back through the system. This is about solutions, and part of our solutions has to be to build more housing and build more housing faster. And again, I grew up in this community, and a lot of my friends who grew up here can't afford to live in San Francisco anymore. We have to think about what we as a city plan to do for the next generation and for San Franciscans now in terms of access to housing. So I helped to identify underutilized sites in my community. In fact, the McDonald's site on Hayden Stanyan, underutilized parking lot. I approached McDonald's, asked them if they would be willing to work with the city. They sold us the land for below market rate, and we're going to build 100% affordable housing for low, moderate, and middle income residents in the Haight-Ashbury community. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to do. Building more housing, getting creative, being proactive, seeking out properties, and no, the city can't afford to buy every single property that's available for housing development. But what we can do is develop public-private partnerships for the purposes of building more housing. And we can build more modular housing. Modular housing can be built faster and less expensive. When we think about people who need homes, we have to move faster and get rid of the bureaucratic layers that get in the way of housing development in San Francisco. And if I can't get that through the Board of Supervisors, I want to make sure that I go to the voters because I want to cut the process in half so that we can get housing production moving in San Francisco. It's also important to make sure that we have people feel safe in our communities. I want to make sure that we add more police officers and they're walking the beats in our neighborhoods and they know our communities. It took years to develop relationships between the young folks that I work with and the police department because at the time, as I said, we were dealing with some of the worst violence in the history of our city. We were losing kids at a regular pace, and I wanted to make sure that our community felt protected. So bringing the police in, working with them in our community, it takes time, but we made a lot of progress in that effort, and we're going to continue to make sure that we get more officers on our streets so that people feel safe. We also have to make sure that our public transportation system is such that it is working for people, that they use it as a priority. In fact, when I came on the Board of Supervisors, I'm the one who actually pushed the MTA and sponsored the legislation for the new bus purchase and the new train purchases, as well as pushing to hire more drivers. Here in San Francisco, we actually banned the box to give people a real shot at a second chance. And some of the folks I grew up with are actually now driving for Muni. People that didn't have an opportunity to work for the city now have an opportunity to work for the city and get a second chance. These are the kinds of policies that I've worked on, and pushing the envelope, I plan to do just that as the mayor of this city. The other thing that I'm pushing for is an education. My time's up? The other thing I'm pushing for is making sure that we make a real connection between everything that's happening in this city and the next generation of young people. You know, I went to public schools, and if it weren't for my teachers and my counselors and the Mayor's Youth Employment and Training Program, I don't know where I would be. As I said, I did lose a sister to a drug overdose. I do have a brother who is still incarcerated, and I think, what is the difference? It's opportunity, and I want to make sure this doesn't continue to happen to people in our city, especially communities who constantly are left behind. And so I'm proposing in my education platform that these companies provide paid internship opportunities for our high school students so that they can hopefully get credit for school, so that they can hopefully get paid, but more importantly, so that they can be exposed at an early age to all that San Francisco has to offer. I didn't know a lot of the stuff that existed in San Francisco existed when I was in high school. And I want to make sure that that doesn't happen to the next generation of young people growing up. And so I want to make sure that the tech companies, the healthcare industry, the city and county of San Francisco, that there is a real opportunity to connect those young people to all the stuff that's going on in our city. It will take a lot of work. San Francisco is an amazing city. It's one that I'm proud to be a part of, one that I'm proud to have grown up in and been able to serve in various capacities throughout my career. I want to live here for the rest of my life, and there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to need to fix in order to make sure that not only do folks who are continuously getting left behind still have an opportunity to be here, but what do we look like in the future, and how do we make sure that the cycle doesn't continue to repeat itself. It's going to take guts, it's going to take fearlessness, it's going to take someone who is willing to roll up their sleeves and do the work necessary to get us to a better place. I'd be honored to have your support, and I thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. That's very moving. So there'll be 4 questions, 10 minutes for the total of these 4 questions. They'll be on 4 separate topics: homelessness, mental health, employment, and community. Okay? And you'll keep time for you again. So the first question on homelessness. Over 40% of the post-9/11 veterans, that is the younger veterans in our community, and 20% of the pre-9/11 veterans, that's mostly from the Vietnam era, have reported being homeless in the past year. On one hand, the San Francisco Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing has reported significant difficulties in getting landlords to take unabashed vouchers. On the other hand, many veterans that have unstable living arrangements that do not meet the Department of Housing and Urban Development definition of homelessness in single-room occupancy SRO housing is not appropriate for our older veterans who need wraparound services. As mayor, what do you intend to do to make sure all veterans are appropriately housed in San Francisco?
Thank you for your question, and as I said, a couple of years ago, Mayor Edley made a commitment that we are going to end veteran homelessness here in the city and county of San Francisco, and I do think that we are well on our way. Identifying locations like the Auburn Hotel, which was completely renovated, which provides a safe, affordable place for 100% veteran housing, is something that we need to think about, and most of those veterans are actually seniors. And I do think that what we have to do is a better job of working directly with our veteran community to identify each person's individual need, because we know there is no one size that fits all. You may have someone who is a senior, you may have someone who does need wraparound services, and making sure we make the connection to the opportunity and the person. But at the end of the day, we have to build more housing. We have to get rid of the bureaucratic red tape that gets in the way. And part of what I am looking forward to doing as well is identifying or working with this program called Move On. Because some of you might know about, our programs where we get formerly homeless people and veterans in particular housed maybe in a single room occupancy place, not the best location for them. And part of what I want to do is work with homeowners who have in-laws, who have other properties where they would be willing to enter into a contract with this particular agency. And it also comes with a social worker, someone who is looking out for that person, someone who is making sure the rent gets paid. Making the connection in that way is something that we could do to assist in this challenge, not just with our veteran population, but also with some of our folks who are living in our SROs and some of our homeless population. So I really want to make sure that there, again, is a real connection to opportunity and what exists in San Francisco. And also, the city should work harder on trying to make the connections so that people, and also potentially provide the subsidies, you know, if the Section 8 VASH program is not sufficient to cover the rent expenses, because those are things that we should be doing, and it could be very helpful in this regard.
Thank you. The second question on mental health. 1/3 of veterans have considered suicide or have made plans to end their life this list. More than half of veterans of all ages are screening positive for PTSD or depression. And post-9/11 veterans are twice as likely as pre-9/11 veterans to engage in high-risk taking behaviors like driving after drinking alcohol, carrying a weapon, or looking to start a fight. Nearly 60% of post-9/11 veterans have probable alcohol drinking problems. 50% of veterans have reported a significant physical or mental health issue for which they are not receiving care. These numbers tell me that we are facing an unprecedented crisis in mental health issues and a wave of second-tier effects that affect families, co-workers, and friends of their veterans in our community. As mayor, what will you do to improve mental health services in San Francisco?
And thank you for that question. And for me, again, it goes back to my education platform, making sure that there are mental health professionals in our schools. I also want to make sure that we reform our mental health system, and I've already begun the process of doing just that. For example, we talk about conservatorship because there are people who are suffering in that particular way. My legislation changes the role of conservatorship so that we remove it from the district attorney's office to the city attorney's office where they handle child conservatorship cases, and also making sure that our departments like Aging and Adult Services, the Department of Public Health, those folks who develop the case, are developing the right case for the purposes of getting people help, getting them conserved if necessary. And the other side of that is our mental health stabilization beds, which again, we opened 54 at St. Mary's. We need to make sure that all of our hospitals have supportive services and have mental health stabilization beds. And this is not a problem that is just going to disappear because we don't want to see it. And I don't think the hospital community is working closely enough with the city to try and provide assistance and services in this regard. It's one that I care about making sure that we do. So I am willing to work with the hospital community, work with our public schools, and reform how we provide support and assistance for mental health.
Thank you so much. The third question is on employment. Veterans face a disproportionately high rate of unemployment and underemployment in the city of San Francisco. 80% of service members leave the military without a job, and almost 60% of post-9/11 veterans in San Francisco reported that their military skills and experiences are dismissed by employers. As a result, 83% of post-9/11 veterans who work full-time have an annual salary that is below $60,000 a year, and 40% of veterans report they earn below $36,000 a year. That is simply not enough to survive, much less live a dignified life. As mayor, what will you do to make sure veterans find appropriate employment in San Francisco?
Thank you, and I would do something similar to what I've been doing in the Western Addition. We have a place called the Success Center. And the Success Center is, we have regular job fairs, we have people who are professionals who help people with their resumes, who help people look for employment opportunities, who help people develop interview skills, and more importantly, you know, folks who want to take it to the next level and look for another opportunity where they can make more money. This Success Center has been incredible. They've held tech job fairs, they've held construction job fairs, retail job fairs, bringing people into the community and working with individuals to try and find the right fit for the person is something that we've been doing already in the Western Addition. It's something that I want to make sure that we're doing in collaboration with our Veterans Commission for the purposes of connecting people to opportunities.
And the last question is on community. Nearly 75% of all veterans in San Francisco have reported difficulties adjusting to civilian life. and 33% reported that they do not know where to go or who to contact to get help. Nearly 2/3 of post-9/11 veterans indicate that civilians do not appreciate the sacrifices they've made, with more than 80% indicating that civilians don't understand their problems. As mayor, what will you do to help reintegrate veterans into our community?
Yeah, this is definitely one that kind of hits home because, as I said, my grandmother, she raised me. My grandfather, he actually served in the Army, and the stories of what I heard and just what happened when he came home and the challenges that existed in their lives was really frustrating. The difficulty in finding employment and finding housing was one that was challenging even back then. And so I do think that we want to, as a city, because I know that there are services, but the problem is not everyone is familiar with what's available and not everyone is connected to what's available. And so I am committed to working with our Veterans Commission and making sure that we're doing a lot more outreach to provide support, to provide services to the veterans community of things that I know already exist, but we also have to expand those programs. We have to expand mental health services because so many people are suffering in that regard. I see it on the streets every day. I'm sure you see it on the streets every day. It's one of the things that I'm most focused on to try and address the challenges that exist with our homeless population specifically. So I do think that we have to make sure that we don't keep the veterans community separated from the rest of the city and county of San Francisco. It has to be integrated. There has to be a way that we work together, and I'm committed as mayor to make sure that we do just that we make the connections and work together to address what your specific concerns are and to increase capacity if there's a need to do so as well.
Thank you to Supervisor London Breed for taking time out to meet with us. I think we have one question from the audience.
Ms. Breed, my name is Joseph Baraka. I'm a super provider at the Veterans Hospital. On behalf of all the veterans, I thank you for coming down here and talking to us. One issue that's been brought to me by my fellow veterans is that they can't afford the muni. And when they get on the bus without paying fare, they get a ticket. They can't afford $2, they can't afford $120. Can you do something to provide free muni services for veterans who'd like to the Veterans Hospital, Fort Miley?
And thank you for your question. I'll start by saying that, number one, you know, when I'm mayor, if I'm so fortunate enough to be mayor of the city, I am going to make sure that we don't have the persons who are giving tickets for fare evasion. The people who are, you know, doing the enforcement on our muni trains and buses, they should be on there to keep the public safe. That's what I really care about because we have so many situations with that. And I think that there is a possibility that along with free muni for youth, free muni for seniors and disabled individuals, we can increase the capacity for free muni for veterans, and I would be happy to work with you in doing so.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes today's program. Now comes the difficult part. The difficult part is reaching out to your friends, your colleagues, other veterans that you have in the community.